Marcus Hale never imagined the last thing he'd carry out of the company he'd helped build for 12 years would fit inside a single cardboard box. A faded family photo, a worn leather notebook filled with handwritten ideas, a chipped coffee mug his daughter had painted in second grade, and the navy blue tie he'd taken off before every late-night inventory count because she always laughed that it made him look too serious. The security guard who escorted him to the parking lot couldn't meet his eyes. Marcus thanked him anyway. There was no anger left by then, only the strange numbness that follows a life-changing blow. 2 weeks earlier, his checking account had held enough to cover the mortgage, his 12-year-old daughter Lily's school expenses, and the modest routines that kept their little world steady. Now, after being dismissed during a sweeping corporate restructuring led by the company's ambitious new CEO, Evelyn Brooks, every carefully planned dollar disappeared faster than he could replace it. Interviews came and went. Recruiters praised his experience before quietly explaining that he was overqualified. Savings that had taken years to build vanished into mortgage payments, groceries, insurance, and utilities. He sold the fishing boat he had once promised to restore with Lily, canceled every subscription they owned, and quietly skipped meals so his daughter would never notice the refrigerator looking emptier each week. When the foreclosure notice finally arrived, Marcus waited until Lily had gone to bed before opening it. He sat alone at the kitchen table where his late wife, Emma, had once planned birthday parties and helped Lily with spelling homework, staring at the paper until sunrise painted pale gold across the walls. 3 months later, after the bank claimed the house and nearly everything inside it, Marcus and Lily squeezed their lives into a tiny apartment above an aging hardware store in a quiet Pennsylvania town. The ceiling creaked whenever it rained, the radiator groaned through the night, and the windows let in enough winter air that Lily sometimes wore 2 sweaters while reading. She never complained. Instead, she smiled, decorated her tiny bedroom with second-hand posters from a thrift shop, and insisted the apartment felt cozy. Marcus knew she was protecting him from guilt far heavier than any moving box. Then, on an afternoon when he was driving home from another unsuccessful interview, a detour around road construction led him past a narrow brick storefront with dusty windows and a weathered wooden sign that simply read Hawthorne Books. A handwritten notice hung crookedly in the glass. Bookstore for sale. Owner retiring. Marcus almost kept driving. He had spent his entire career managing warehouse operations for one of the largest publishing distributors in the region, making sure books reached stores across 3 states, but he had never owned a bookstore. He had no investors, almost no savings, and absolutely no business risking the little security he still had. Yet something made him park the car. Inside, the scent of old paper, polished wood, and freshly brewed coffee wrapped around him like a forgotten memory. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with novels whose spines had faded beneath decades of sunlight. An elderly man with silver hair looked up from behind the counter, smiled warmly, and said, "Take your time. Good stories have a way of finding the people who need them most." Marcus didn't realize it then, but those simple words were about to change the course of both his life and the life of the woman who had believed firing a single dad was nothing more than another number on a spreadsheet. Marcus returned to Hawthorne Books the very next morning, this time with Lily beside him. She wandered the narrow aisles as though exploring a hidden world, running her fingertips gently across worn book spines while sunlight poured through the front windows in dusty golden beams. In one quiet corner, an old orange cat slept on a stack of history books without the slightest concern for the customers who stepped around him. The elderly owner introduced himself as Walter Hawthorne, whose parents had opened the bookstore in 1971, back when families still spent Saturday afternoons browsing shelves instead of scrolling screens. His wife had managed the cafe tucked into the back of the store until arthritis forced her to retire, and after she passed away 2 years earlier, Walter simply no longer had the strength to keep the business alive alone. Sales had fallen every year. The roof leaked whenever heavy rain rolled through town. The furnace belonged in a museum, and half the light fixtures flickered unpredictably. Still, regular customers faithfully appeared each week. A retired English teacher came every Tuesday to recommend novels to teenagers. A young mother brought her twin boys every Saturday morning for story hour. College students occupied the cafe during exam season, nursing one cup of coffee for hours while studying beneath shelves packed with classics. Marcus noticed something that reminded him of his old job. The business wasn't failing because people had stopped caring. It was failing because no one had adapted it to changing times. Inventory hadn't been updated in years. The website barely functioned. Thousands of valuable books sat forgotten in storage while newer titles remained out of stock. Walter admitted he had never understood online ordering or social media, laughing softly as he confessed that his granddaughter had once spent 20 minutes explaining hashtags before giving up entirely. Marcus smiled for the first time in weeks. Numbers, logistics, and organization had always been his language. For the first time since losing his corporate career, he wasn't thinking about everything he had lost. He was thinking about what could still be built. Reality returned the moment he asked the price. Even after Walter reduced it significantly, Marcus simply didn't have enough money. That evening, he stared at the figures until midnight, calculating every possibility. The tiny retirement account he had sworn never to touch. The severance payment he had carefully protected. The old pickup truck he barely used anymore. Nothing added up cleanly. When Lily walked into the kitchen for a glass of water, she found him surrounded by papers. She quietly sat beside him and asked, "Do you really like that bookstore?" Marcus hesitated before admitting that it felt like the first place since losing his job where he could actually imagine a future instead of constantly mourning the past. Lily looked down for a moment before disappearing into her room. A minute later, she returned carrying a small ceramic jar decorated with hand-painted flowers. It held every dollar she had saved over 4 birthdays, Christmas gifts from relatives, and babysitting money earned helping a neighbor after school. She placed it gently on the table between them. "Mom always said money is supposed to help people you love," she whispered. "I think she'd want you to have it." Marcus felt his throat tighten so suddenly he couldn't speak. He wrapped both arms around his daughter, holding her as tightly as he could while silently promising himself that no matter how difficult life became, she would never regret believing in him. 2 days later, Walter surprised him with an offer no commercial bank would ever consider. Marcus could make a modest down payment using what little remained of his savings, then pay the rest directly to Walter in small monthly installments over 6 years. "I'd rather see this place belong to someone who loves books than someone who only loves the building," Walter said with a gentle smile. Marcus signed the papers with a borrowed pen, knowing nearly everyone who heard the story would think he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Deep down, even he wasn't entirely sure they were wrong. The first year tested Marcus in ways no corporate job ever had. Owning a bookstore sounded peaceful until he discovered that nothing about running one was easy. The espresso machine broke during his second week, flooding part of the cafe just as the Saturday morning crowd arrived. A delivery of new releases disappeared after a shipping company sent the boxes to the wrong address, leaving empty spaces on the shelves during the busiest weekend of the month. The aging furnace quit on the coldest day of January, forcing customers to browse in winter coats, while Marcus handed out free coffee simply to keep people warm. Every unexpected expense felt like another reminder that he had gambled everything on a dream few people believed in. He woke before dawn to clean floors, organize inventory, answer online orders, and bake simple pastries for the cafe after watching countless instructional videos late into the night. By the time the store opened, he had already worked several hours, yet he greeted every customer with the same warm smile because Walter had once told him that people rarely remembered the price of a book, but they always remembered how a place made them feel. Lily became his unofficial partner after school, shelving returned books, recommending young adult novels to children her age, and writing tiny handwritten cards that read, "This one made me laugh," or "You'll love the ending." Customers began asking specifically for Lily's picks, and those books often sold out first. Marcus also introduced changes that respected the bookstore's history without trapping it in the past. He launched an online catalog, offered local delivery, started a monthly book club, and invited independent authors from across Pennsylvania to host weekend signings. Slowly, foot traffic increased. Families returned. Students lingered longer in the cafe. Elderly customers who had nearly stopped visiting began bringing neighbors with them. Hawthorne Books wasn't making anyone rich, But for the first time in years, it was breathing again. Marcus still worried every month about payroll, utility bills, and the next unexpected repair. Yet each small success reminded him that rebuilding a life happened one ordinary day at a time. Nearly 3 years passed before the past finally came looking for him. It was a gray Thursday afternoon with steady rain tapping against the bookstore's front windows. Lily, now 15, sat behind the cafe counter finishing algebra homework while the orange cat slept in his favorite armchair beside the fireplace. Marcus was helping an elderly customer locate a mystery novel when the front door opened with its familiar brass bell. He glanced up automatically, expecting another regular. Instead, time seemed to stop. Standing just inside the entrance, carefully folding a black umbrella, was Evelyn Brooks. She looked older than he remembered. The confidence that had once filled every room she entered had softened into quiet exhaustion. Fine lines framed her eyes, and the tailored business suits she used to wear had been replaced by a simple navy coat and comfortable shoes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Lily noticed the silence and looked from her father to the unfamiliar woman with growing curiosity. Marcus felt memories crash through him all at once: the cardboard box, the foreclosure notice, sleepless nights wondering how to feed his daughter, and the humiliating interviews that never became job offers. Evelyn seemed equally stunned. Her eyes slowly traveled across the crowded shelves, the busy cafe, the handwritten event board, and finally settled on Marcus standing behind the counter. She inhaled quietly before speaking the words neither of them had ever imagined would be necessary. "Marcus, I didn't know this place was yours." Evelyn stood quietly near the entrance as customers drifted around her, unaware that the history between the two people facing each other stretched far beyond the walls of the bookstore. Marcus finally broke the silence with the same calm professionalism he offered every visitor. "Welcome to Hawthorne Books. Let me know if you're looking for something specific." There was no bitterness in his voice, but there wasn't any warmth either. It was the tone of a man who had learned to protect his peace. Evelyn gave a faint nod and admitted that her electric car was charging 2 blocks away when a cafe owner suggested she spend the wait inside the bookstore. She hadn't recognized the name from the street. She certainly hadn't expected to find the operations manager she'd dismissed nearly 3 years earlier running one of the busiest independent bookstores in the county. Marcus prepared a coffee without saying much, placed it gently on the counter, and charged her the same price every customer paid. She sat near the window, slowly turning the pages of a novel she never actually read. Instead, she quietly watched the life unfolding around her. She saw Lily helping an elderly customer download an ebook onto a new tablet with remarkable patience. She watched Marcus recommend children's stories to a nervous young father who admitted he had never enjoyed reading but wanted his son to love books. She noticed regular customers greeting Marcus by name, laughing with him as though they had known each other for years. Nothing about the bookstore felt forced. It felt like a community, something she realized she had spent years trying to manufacture inside corporate conference rooms with expensive consultants and glossy presentations. Before leaving, Evelyn approached the register. "You've built something special," she said sincerely. Marcus simply thanked her for visiting. She hesitated, as though wanting to say something more, but quietly walked out into the rain instead. Most people would have assumed that was the end of it. It wasn't. The following Tuesday she returned, ordering the same black coffee and purchasing a historical novel. A week later she came back again, this time attending the evening book club without mentioning who she was. Soon her visits became almost routine. She always arrived alone, always sat near the same window, and always left without asking Marcus about the past. The silence eventually became impossible to ignore. Late one afternoon, after the last customer had gone home, Marcus carried 2 fresh cups of coffee to her table and asked the question that had been lingering in his mind for weeks. "Why do you keep coming back?" Evelyn looked out the rain-speckled window before answering. "Because every time I walk in here, I'm reminded of the biggest mistake of my career." She explained that less than 18 months after Marcus had been fired, the publishing company began collapsing under decisions made during its aggressive cost-cutting strategy. Warehouses struggled with delayed shipments. Employee turnover doubled. Longtime clients canceled contracts after repeated service failures. The efficiency reports she had proudly presented to the board looked impressive on paper, but reality had quietly unraveled beneath them. While reviewing internal documents during the company's final restructuring, she found several reports Marcus had submitted years earlier warning about exactly those operational risks. He hadn't been resisting change. He had been trying to protect the company from making expensive mistakes. Evelyn lowered her eyes before speaking again. "I thought I was removing an obstacle," she admitted softly. "Instead, I fired the one person who understood the business better than I did." Marcus remained silent for several seconds, studying the woman who had once seemed completely certain of every decision she made. He had imagined this moment countless times during the darkest nights after losing his job. In every version, he delivered a perfect speech that exposed her mistakes and made her feel every ounce of the pain she had caused. Yet standing in the warmth of the bookstore he had rebuilt with his own hands, those words no longer seemed important. "You didn't just fire me," he finally said, his voice calm but steady. "You changed my daughter's life. She lost her home, her friends, and the place where her mother had lived. Those aren't things a severance package replaces." Evelyn didn't interrupt or defend herself. She simply listened, her eyes fixed on the untouched coffee in front of her. When Marcus finished, she quietly apologized, not with polished corporate language or carefully rehearsed excuses, but with a simple sincerity that carried more weight than any speech. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I can't undo what happened, but I will regret it for the rest of my life." He nodded once. Forgiveness wasn't something he could offer in a single afternoon, and she seemed to understand that. Over the following months, Evelyn continued visiting the bookstore, never forcing conversations about the past and never asking for redemption. Instead, she supported the place the same way every loyal customer did. She attended author events, purchased books for neighborhood schools, donated to literacy programs Marcus organized, and quietly introduced Hawthorne books to several independent publishers looking for local retail partners. She never exaggerated his success or used old connections to hand him opportunities he hadn't earned. She simply told people the truth. If you care about books and good people, you should visit Hawthorne Books. Those recommendations gradually brought new customers through the front door. By the 4th anniversary of Marcus buying the store, the upstairs offices had been renovated into a children's reading center, weekend literacy classes filled every seat, and the tiny cafe had become one of the town's favorite gathering places. One Saturday morning, Walter Hawthorne stopped by carrying his usual walking cane and paused just inside the entrance. Every chair was occupied. Children listened to a volunteer reading stories aloud near the fireplace, while parents browsed shelves overflowing with new arrivals. Marcus caught Walter smiling before the old man quickly pretended to inspect a display of travel guides. "Looks like you finally made this place louder than I ever did," Walter joked. Marcus laughed, realizing the bookstore was no longer something he was struggling to save. It had become something the town couldn't imagine losing. That evening, after closing the register, Lily asked the question that had quietly lingered between them for years. "Dad, are you glad she fired you?" Marcus looked around the bookstore before answering. He saw families discovering stories together, neighbors sharing coffee, children laughing in the reading corner, and the life he and Lily had built from almost nothing. Then he shook his head gently. "No," he replied. "I'd give anything to erase the pain we went through. But I'm grateful I didn't let losing my job become the end of our story." As they switched off the lights and locked the front door, Marcus slipped his old leather notebook beside a newer one filled with fresh ideas for the future. He finally understood something life had taken years to teach him. Sometimes the greatest chapters don't begin when everything goes according to plan. They begin the moment you're forced to write a completely different ending than the one you expected.